Welcome to another AlphaChat. With me today is Scott Taylor from AlphaCert. I thought we'd have a chat about something that's top of mind for many of your clients right now, operational resilience and risk management, particularly with Australia's CPS 230 coming into effect in July this year.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and great to be here with you today. Operational resilience has always been important. As you know, there's definitely a heightened focus on it now globally. At its core, it's about ensuring that investment operations can continue to function effectively, even faced with disruption. For investment operations and data teams, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about managing billions of assets. Even with small errors, they can have significant consequences for funds. And with regulations like CPS 230 in Australia coming into effect soon, there's absolutely added pressure to formalise some of these processes.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more conversations about this with clients in Australia, and I'm sure you're seeing them in New Zealand, and it's a global thing. So why are the regulators around the world putting this focus onto operational resilience?
I think there's a fundamental shift in how regulators view operational risk globally. Historically, the focus has primarily been on financial risks, market risk, credit risk, and so on. But more recently, particularly over the last decade, we've seen several high-profile incidents where operational failures had massive impacts on customers and market confidence. There's a significant bank failure in the UK in 2018, where nearly 2 million customers were locked out of their accounts for weeks, and the bank faced hundreds of millions of pounds in costs and fines. In the investment space, we've seen fund administrators experiencing system failures that delayed NAV and unit pricing calculations, that prevented timely trading or redemptions. One other major European asset manager experienced week-long outage in its valuation systems in 2021, and this impacts thousands of investors and led to significant regulatory scrutiny. And I think that's what's sort of driving some of the behaviour.
And the reputation risk and the anger of consumers towards these financial institutions is significant. We've had here in Australia just 12 months ago, a major super fund experienced a significant cloud outage. So online services went offline, members couldn't access their accounts and view their balances. So if we look at all these instances across the globe, it's really driving a shift in regulatory approach.
Yeah, 100%, Stephen. Regulators have recognised that in today's digital environment, operational disruptions can be just as damaging to customers and market stability as financial issues. The interconnected nature of financial services means that problems can cascade quite quickly throughout the system. So hang on.
Yeah, super funds specifically, we've got members expecting consistent access to information, accurate processing of contributions, investment switches, etc. All these disruptions really impact financial well-being. So let's focus specifically on CPS 230. Could you break down what this means for investment operations teams?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in its essence, CPS 230 is APRA's new operational risk management prudential standard, and it's quite comprehensive. It's built on three key pillars: operational risk management, business continuity management, and third-party risk management. For investment teams, this means they need robust systems to identify, assess, and manage operational risks across all of their processes. What's particularly challenging is the new requirement to demonstrate clear oversight and control over investment data. Think about all the data flows throughout a typical superannuation fund, whether it's market data, transactions, valuations, performance metrics. The sheer volume these days is enormous, and that's going up every year as well. And every piece needs to be accurate and traceable. So that's kind of the driver.
Yeah, and I've noticed that many operations teams are really struggling with demonstrating control, and it's not good enough just to say it'll be okay. You've really got to be able to demonstrate control over the data ecosystem. So how are you seeing funds adapting to these requirements?
Exactly right. Many funds have grown organically over time, accumulating various systems and data sources. A lot of funds have grown through mergers and inherited systems and data sources as well. And now they're faced with the challenge of creating a comprehensive map of their data ecosystem and showing how they may maintain control over it. The most effective approach we're seeing is centralization and automation. And that's funds needing to establish a single source of truth for investment data with clear governance structures around that data. And it isn't just about compliance, it's about being resilient into the core of the operations. Yeah.
And the term governance keeps on coming up again and again in conversations I'm having.
Yeah.
And operational resilience, as we've said before, isn't just an Australian concern. I'm familiar in the UK, the operational resilience framework came into effect a few years ago, and this focuses heavily on important business services, what they've defined, and setting impact tolerances. So not dissimilar to some of the things we're seeing in Australia. It's so important to define how quickly services can be restored when there's a disruption. What about over in New Zealand? What are you seeing there?
Oh, here in New Zealand, the Reserve Bank's, BS11 for banks and similar guidance for insurers address operational risks. Though not quite as comprehensive as the CPS 230, to be honest, but the direction of travel is quite clear across all these jurisdictions. Regulators want financial institutions to formalise operational resilience frameworks and demonstrate they can maintain critical functions through disruption. I think that's what we're finding over here.
So stay tuned in New Zealand. Sounds like it might be coming your way,
Yeah.
because there really is this global convergence around requirements like this. And many organisations are operating across jurisdictions. So I imagine that creates real challenges, but also opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. For organisations operating across these regions, there's definitely a compliance burden, but there's also an opportunity to implement consistent best practices. Rather than treating each jurisdiction's requirements separately, forward-thinking organisations are building comprehensive frameworks that satisfy the most stringent requirements, and this actually creates efficiency in the long run.
So let's talk about data management specifically. And I know this is a particular passion of yours,
Yeah.
and it's clearly a foundational element in operational resilience. But I've seen many funds struggling with fragmented data sources, manual processes, and inconsistent quality controls. So, in your experience, how critical is it to getting this right?
I can't overstate how important it is. And I know a lot of organisations and funds are on their own sort of data maturity journey. Investment data is the lifeblood of fund operations. When data management is fragmented or relies on manual processes, you're introducing significant operational risks. Think about it: if your performance to exposure data is inaccurate, or you're making investment decisions based on flawed information, regardless of the organisation that you're in, if your data processes break down, you can't meet reporting obligations to regulators or members. So if you have APRA or the regulators doing audits, it's absolutely going to be fundamental to be able to show them that you've got the processes in place. Under CPS 230 specifically, funds need to demonstrate that they have robust controls around data quality, consistency, and very strong data governance throughout the organisation. So there needs to be clear audit trails showing who changed what and when, and systemizing can help with that as well. So there are platforms out there that will have auditable features, that will bring in that single source of truth, that will provide that strong governance for you. And that drives a lot of efficiency into the business, reduces a lot of risk as well. And they need to show that the data environment is resilient to disruptions.
And it's all about that resilience.
Yeah.
And that very much aligns with what I'm hearing from operations teams. Many are concerned with the amount of manual workarounds that's built up over time. And we've all seen it: spreadsheets, email-based approvals, and so on. And these might work day to day, but they don't provide the governance or resilience needed under the new regulations.
Yeah, exactly. Those manual processes, Stephen, are often invisible risks until something goes wrong. One of the most common scenarios we see is organisations relying on a few key individuals who understand how everything fits together. If those people are unavailable, or heaven forbid, they take a holiday because they need one, the process simply breaks down. That's precisely the kind of dependency that CPS 230 is designed to address. Now, in smaller organisations, there's a high chance that that key person dependency does exist, and this is where systemizing comes into play. If you can systemize some of that process, and you create those systemized audit trails, you bring in that resilience, and technology can actually complement and enable a lot of those things as well.
Yeah, look, key person risk in small, but even not so small
Yeah.
organizations, I certainly keep on coming across that.
Yeah.
And you've talked about the automation, the audit trails, etc. So how does technology fit into this picture? Obviously, you at AlphaCert believe in technology playing a crucial role, And I'd be interested in your perspective on how investment operations teams should be thinking about their technology stack in light of these regulatory changes.
Technology, in my opinion, is absolutely central to addressing these challenges. The most resilient organisations are using platforms to centralise data management. They're not doing it on spreadsheets. And the validation of data coming into organisations is incredibly important. So there's an assumption that custodian data or other data sources are providing accurate data, but to be able to validate that and create centralized system is really critical. So automating those workflows, providing comprehensive audit trails, it isn't just about efficiency, though that's certainly a benefit. It's about building in the controls and the resilience that regulators are demanding. So looking specifically at investment data management, technology needs to aggregate data from multiple sources, apply validation rules that should be built in to a lot of the real key investment management platforms, flag exceptions for review, and to do this quickly so that it's not holding up the flow of data, document decisions, approvals, audit trails we've spoken about, and support business continuity through redundancy and recovery capabilities. That is exactly why the AlphaCert platform have these capabilities, and we're built with these capabilities from the ground up. It's not just to streamline operations, but it's to build in the governance and the resilience that investment operations needs.
Gee, it sounds like preparing for CPS 230 is a significant undertaking, especially if there's a need to implement new systems.
Yeah, what we found is that a phased approach works well. So starting with the most critical data flows and gradually expanding. The key is to begin with a clear view of your end-to-end processes and identify what the highest risk is. And frankly, the alternative, trying to meet these new regulatory requirements with existing fragmented systems, is likely to be a lot more complex and risky in the long run. We've had clients who initially tried to address regulatory requirements by adding in more manual checks and controls, throwing more people at it, thinking that might solve the problem, but it just adds significant costs to organisations. That ultimately doesn't benefit members, only to find that the approach was unsustainable. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your reference to the end-to-end processes and identifying where the highest risks are really important. And that leads us into talking about business continuity aspects of CPS 230, because that's one of the primary reasons for these regulations globally, is so that you can have that business continuity and continue to serve your customers.
Yeah.
So this is another area where I'm seeing a lot of concern within investment operations teams. So from your experience, Scott, what should they be focusing on?
Business continuity management under CPS 230 requires organisations to identify critical operations and ensure they continue to function through disruptions. If we look at investment operations, this means having clear plans for scenarios like system outages, data provider failures, or staff unavailability. The pandemic actually provided a real world test for many organisations to test these plans. It revealed some gaps. Many had plans for office unavailability, but they didn't really fully consider scenarios where entire regions were affected simultaneously. So investment data specifically, the continuity planning needs to address questions like, what happens if a key data feed fails? How quickly can we switch to alternative sources? How do we validate the alternative data for accuracy? And these aren't just theoretical concerns, they're scenarios that operations teams need to be prepared for.
And I imagine having a centralized platform makes this planning more straightforward and makes it easier for investment organizations.
Absolutely. When your investment data flows through a centralized platform with consistent processes, your continuity planning becomes much, much more simpler. You're not trying to document dozens of separate processes across different systems. You have complete visibility into dependencies and can identify single points of failure a lot more easily. Plus, modern platforms like AlphaCert are designed with resilience in mind. So redundant infrastructure, automatic failover, comprehensive backup and recovery capabilities, use of the cloud, hosting through major organizations like Microsoft. This gives operations teams confidence that their critical data process can continue functioning even when individual components fail.
And look, as we've seen from examples around the world, it's not if they'll fail, but it's when they'll fail. And one of the big issues in investment operations is the reliance on third parties. And one of the key pillars of CPS 230 is third party risk management. Given how dependent investment operations teams are on external data providers, their custodians, technology vendors, this is particularly relevant. So, what should investment operations teams be thinking about here?
Stephen, such an important point. Investment operations typically rely on complex network of third parties, market data providers, index providers, custodians, fund administrators, and technology vendors. Each of these represent a potential point of failure in your operational process. So CPS 230 requires organisations to have frameworks for assessing, monitoring, and managing these third-party risks. This includes initial due diligence, ongoing monitoring, contingency planning for failure scenarios, particularly for material service providers. The key is understanding not just the direct relationship, but the dependencies between them. We're seeing a lot more organisations mapping out their entire third-party ecosystem, identifying critical dependencies, and developing specific continuity plans for each one. This might include alternative data sources, backup service providers, or internal capabilities that can be activated if needed.
Yeah, it's so important to have those plans in place of what we're going to do when it happens. One of the big problems I'm seeing many operations teams grappling with is how to demonstrate compliance with these requirements, especially when some third party relationships have been in place for years without formal risk assessment processes.
It's a common challenge. You need to show that you've identified risk, assessed their potential impact, and implemented appropriate controls. This might include service level agreements, regular performance reviews, and specific contingency plans. You should have good ongoing governance set up with a lot of your third party providers, particularly your key ones. So this might mean meeting with them monthly to talk about service performance, but it should also be quarterly governance reviews as well that probably talk about a bit more on the strategy, things that might be of value to a fund, such as actually what is a third party product provider's roadmap for the future and how that is going to address risk.
Yeah, having that strong relationship with third party providers and making sure they understand who their service providers are. The fourth parties, and that is really important. And I know AlphaCert is one of those third party providers, one of the major service providers, and therefore you've got experience at implementing these approaches. So, with the introduction of all these regulations is a lot to do. We've covered a lot of ground here on what CPS 230 requires. So thinking about the implication and, looking at some of the experiences maybe from AlphaCert, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing organisations facing as they work towards compliance?
Yeah, and I think I might have mentioned this to you in the past over our conversations that we've had, is the biggest challenge, and this is no different to a few years back, Stephen, when I think I might have mentioned this to you, is knowing when to start. CPS 230 is comprehensive. It's covering operational risk management, it's business continuity and third-party risk management. It can feel overwhelming, especially for teams that are already stretched thin, and a lot of teams are. But you need to start somewhere, and we typically recommend starting with a gap analysis, understanding where your current practices align with the requirements and where there are gaps. From there, you prioritise based on risk and impact. Which gaps represent the most significant risk to your operations? Another common challenge is breaking down silos. So operational resilience cuts across traditional organisational boundaries. It requires collaboration between operations, risk management, technology, and business units. Creating cross-functional working groups can help ensure a comprehensive approach.
Look, they're all really important points. Many are concerned about getting the resources they need to implement these change and to maintain that going forward. And there are just so many competing priorities within investment managers at the moment.
That's a valid concern. The initiatives do require investment both in terms of people and technology, prioritisation, and it requires executive buy-in. So, that's really important. It's important to view this as not just a compliance cost, but an investment in operational excellence. Organisations that approach this strategically often find opportunities to streamline operations, reduce costs in the long run, at the same time reducing risk, which is important as well. So, for example, by centralising and automating investment data management, you're not just addressing compliance requirements, you're potentially addressing efficiency improvements within the organization, reducing manual effort, improving data quality, and that drives trust from the decision makers, enabling better investment decisions. This ultimately goes back to benefiting the end customer, which ultimately is the member or the customer, because if we can reduce risk, drive efficiency, and at the same time provide better returns, that's the ultimate goal. It is key to align your operational resilience initiatives with broader strategic objectives as well. If you're planning system upgrades or process improvements, consider how these can be done under the CPS 230 requirements at the same time.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And, there's so many benefits of centralising and automating investment data management beyond compliance. So they're all very important. So as we wrap up, Scott, what sort of final advice would you give to an investment operation leader? They're working very hard towards operational resilience and compliance with regulations. How would you counsel them on what they should be looking at and focusing on?
I think if I could just summarise on 3 key points, right? The first, I'll take a strategic approach. Don't view it purely as just a compliance exercise, but use it as an opportunity to strengthen your operation and create a competitive advantage through resiliency and efficiency within your operation. Second, I'd focus on your data foundation. So if you've got disparate systems, if you rely still on spreadsheets and manual data manipulation to deliver critical decision-making data to other people in the business who will be making important decisions based on this data, by centralizing and automating your process, you can create a very, very strong foundation for addressing all aspects of CPS 230, really. And finally, set a plan. Don't try and do everything at once. Prioritize based on risk to your operation and the impact. Start with areas that pose the greatest risk to your operations, and work methodically from there. And make sure it has the exec oversight and buy-in right from day one. Organisations that approach this thoughtfully will emerge with not just a regulatory compliance, but stronger, more resilient operation that can adapt to whatever challenges the future brings.
That's all great advice, Scott. So thanks for sharing your insights today. I'm sure our audience will find this discussion valuable as they navigate their own operational resilience journeys.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, talking with you, particularly around such an important topic. And of course, we're always happy to continue conversations with organisations that would like more specific guidance on their particular challenges. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. And thanks again, and see you all next time.